Love and hate, connection and chaos. These aren't just themes in Blonde Redhead's music, especially their early music. They're the forces that shaped the band itself. Today, we're exploring the story of the band's debut, from a detailed account of their early days to the release of Blonde Redhead, their 1994 debut album. Around the 30th anniversary of the band's debut release, member Kazu Makino noted that the hate and the contempt are as strong as the love, reflecting on the complex bond between the band members that has driven their music and relationships over more than 3 decades. Hi, I'm Andy Fenstermaker, host of Poetic Wax, a weekly music history series and audio podcast where I dig into the record collection I've been building since the 1990s and explore the sometimes little known history of a band, album, or song from within. Blonde Redhead is a band that dominates my turntable. They hit number 1 in my Spotify Wrapped in 2024, hitting the top 5 in 2023. It's a band whose music I adore and obsess over. Today, I am pulling the Masculine Feminine box set from my collection, which contains their first 2 albums. And this is the story of the first of those releases, how the band came together and how that raw and revolutionary statement from Makino set the tone for their iconic career. Oh, and stay tuned, as I'll be covering the second, La Mia Vita Violenta, in a few months. In the liner notes of the Masculine Feminine box set, Arto Lindsay writes that, as with many bands, it was probably aura, vibe, or beauty that first attracted them to each other. They began not as the harmonious collaboration they'd become in the mid-2000s, what I recount in the story of Misery is a Butterfly, but as a meeting of vastly different minds, and that sound was reflected in their music. Kazu Makino, the introspective Japanese artist, met Amadeo and Simone Pace, Italian twins with a shared love of dissonant and avant-garde music. From the start, the trio's chemistry was both their greatest strength and their greatest challenge. In a 2003 interview with The Guardian, Kazu explained, "We're not naturally suited to each other. There's a lot of conflict, but the music forces us to find a way to communicate." This emotional push and pull became a defining characteristic of their sound, with tension manifesting in every jangly guitar riff, off-kilter beat, and haunting vocal line. But for the true beginning, we must step back a little bit further to 1990. In a move of defiance toward a strict upbringing on traditional Japanese values, Makino left her home in Tokyo, relocating on a student visa to New York City. Her parents weren't keen on her desire to be a musician, especially one outside of the realm of the classical genre. The Pace twins, on the other hand, were born in Italy, relocating with their parents to Montreal for their teenage years before moving to the United States to study music at Berklee College of Music in Boston, before then relocating to New York. Introduced through a mutual friend who thought their musical styles would pair well together, they connected at the Italian restaurant where the brothers had a regular gig. Even then, there was conflict. Makino was worried about being in a band with brothers, whereas Amadeo had anxiety around clashing musical interests. Still, she joined the twins, who had been performing a few gigs with Icelandic bassist Skuli Sverrisson. The name of the box set is taken from the moniker they donned for the performances, Masculine Feminine. The differences they had would inspire their early sounds. Amadeo notes, "I love jazz and wanted to improvise. Simone was immersed in Brazilian music, and Kazu had her own rebel ideas, influenced by My Bloody Valentine and Sonic Youth. I abandoned everything I learned in school and began playing in alternate tunings." Those early days were wrought with worry. All 3 had arrived in the United States on student visas, so there was a constant underlying concern they get deported. These clashes of emotion, anxiety around being deported, ferocity around wildly different influences, and excitement around creating something new helped define their early sound, which sounded like nothing else in those days. Add to that mix a tumultuous romance between Makino and Amadeo. It wasn't easy for them, says Simone. They lived together, so there was no escape. Lots of fights, lots of emotion. We even tried therapy, all three of us, to figure out a healthier way to deal with each other. Amadeo adds, we'd spend so much time together at practice and at home. It was great for the music, but we'd fight at rehearsal, then come home pissed off and be upset for days. Somewhere in the mix of those early days, Schooley would leave, and they'd change their name to Blonde Redhead, and Maki Takahashi would join as bassist, remaining through the release of their debut LP, and leaving shortly after. The trio had begun writing songs, first as Masculine Feminine, and then, at some point, transitioning to Blonde Redhead, after a song by no-wave band DNA off of their EP, A Taste of DNA. One of the first written, while still under the name Masculine Feminine, was Girl Boy, a mellow, melodic, breathy crooner that remains, to this day, a fan favorite. But it was at a My Bloody Valentine show in 1992 that changed everything. The saturated wall of noise MBV created resonated with all three members, leaving Kazu sitting dazed on the floor watching, completely dumbfounded, as the crowd filtered out of the venue, wondering what just happened. The noise permeated everything, and the three took that experience as a sign, setting out in a slightly new direction. As we continue the story, it's right here that we must turn to Sonic Youth. Enter Kim Gordon. Kazu ran into Kim while grocery shopping, and again later at a Free Kitten show, which was Gordon's side project at the time. This encounter led to Blonde Redhead landing an opening slot for Sonic Youth's upcoming jaunt to Italy. During this tour, they got to know Steve Shelley, the drummer for Sonic Youth, who had just given Nirvana a nod with his new label, Smells Like Records. He saw some potential in Blonde Redhead's volatile energy and offered to produce their debut album and release it on Smells Like. In fact, he'd released their first two albums on the label, both found within the Masculine Feminine box set, along with a handful of early singles, including Vag, backed by Jetstar. The studio sessions tested the band's creativity, and Shelley helped them channel their emotions into 8 tracks that were as powerful as they were unpolished. To record, they selected Random Falls in New York City, which was little more than an apartment on the 12th floor of a building without an elevator on West 30th. We went there because of pavement, but it turned out to be a tiny studio in this guy Mark Venezia's apartment, Simone would recall. While the engineer would run off for hours betting on horses and gambling, the band would record takes with Shelley helping select the takes to use and in what sequence. The record would drop in July of 1994. Trouser Press described the results as, quote, a mix of warped pop nuggets and trippy guitar forays, full of unpredictable energy. Always there was a push and a pull involved between intensity and purity, explosions and melody, rhythm and chaos. You turn a corner and it's high drama. That was Arto Lindsay from the liner notes. With Shelley's guidance, Blonde Redhead embraced their imperfections, creating a sound that teetered on the edge of chaos that still felt deeply intentional. It was all a reflection of their own dynamic as a group. Noise and pop songs were not really a new idea, but noise and the kind of slowly swelling romantic and dark chord changes that Amadeo devised was. Simone's polyrhythmic drumming was a far cry from what most of the downtown was thumping. Released in 1994, their self-titled debut album was raw and uncompromising. At just 29 minutes long, it felt more like an emotional outburst than a conventional record, somewhere in between an EP and an LP. Tracks like Shuri Shura and I Don't Want You showcase both their aggression and their vulnerability. And you find subtle pop gems too, like Girl Boy. In an interview with Be More Art, Kazu comments on the discomfort of being me. Quote, even if you're not doing anything weird or different from anybody else, you're still being looked at as someone strange. It's an abstract concept, but for many, myself included, it's entirely relatable. And I think it's why I've always been drawn to Blonde Redhead's music. You get that here, perhaps more blatantly than on some of their subsequent releases. The music mirrors their internal dynamics, oscillating between moments of intimacy and discord, with Kazu's ethereal voice soaring above the cacophony. This debut was polarizing but undeniably impactful. At the time, and even now, it can be a bit polarizing for any not used to the fringes of indie culture. Blending noise rock with avant-garde and no-wave in their earlier days is quite far removed from the dreamier, more shoegaze-laden sounds they've given us the past few decades. For Blonde Redhead, the release was a catharsis, capturing the turmoil and love that fueled their creativity. And in their noisier era, it's perhaps most apparent. Writer Brandon Gentry picks up on this without noting it explicitly in his coverage of the album on AllMusic. Quote, recalling the no-wave movement of the late 70s, the self-titled debut of New York City's Blonde Redhead is a glorious piece of dense, art-damaged noise, with songs that move from drifting melodicism to raging oral assaults in the course of a few measures. End quote. However, at the time, things weren't rosy. Aaron Osman recalls this in the masculine-feminine liner notes. Quote, the quiet, loud angularity Blonde Redhead was cultivating did not jibe with the grunge-filtered indie rock canon of the time. We kept being rejected over and over by the scene, Kazu would recall. The hate and love that defined their early work and their relationships didn't just stay behind the scenes. It became the essence of their music, establishing a legacy of honesty and vulnerability that resonates to this day. Love and hate, harmony and chaos coexist here to create something profoundly beautiful. As they've evolved, that tension remains at the heart of their music, making them one of the most compelling bands in modern alternative rock history. In the next few months, their second LP, La Mia Vida Violenta, turns 30, and I'll be exploring the history of that release here on my channel as well. So like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all those other things. Until then, dig into the story of how a tragic horse accident helped transform Blonde Redhead in the early 2000s from the art rock of the 1990s into the dream pop they've given us since. I dig into the fascinating history of Misery is a Butterfly in that one.